think at its peak, I think it was 2011, Alto sold on average 26,000 cars per month.
If you draw the industry, Maruti 800, then grows by Alto, then grows by WagonR. That's the three waves of Maruti.
One feels that Maruti almost has a duty to make it, to give that, let's say, first step of entry-level mobility where other automakers have frankly abandoned it.
The reign that Alto has had is something which I don't think we will ever see it again.
What does it tell you about the hatchback market? I think that's what really this dovetails into, because the Alto is the barometer of the hatchback segment. Hello and welcome back to Deep Drive, our weekly podcast on all things automotive, powered by Kotak Mahindra Prime. Now, this week we have a very interesting topic. In fact, it's about a car that I think everyone in India is aware of. It's a car that is really driving Indians today. It is the Maruti Suzuki Alto. It's been around for ages. It took the mantle from the Maruti 800, but it is now in decline. So I have with me Ravi Bhatia, who is the president of JATO Dynamics India. When we have Ravi here, it's always going to be about a lot of statistics and a lot of good insights. Ravi, thanks for joining us. And I think, just to kick this off, the Alto, clearly, I think it's one of those cars which will always be in the pantheon of greats in India. I mean, it is in decline right now, more a state of the hatchback market, which we'll get into. But, just coming to the Alto, born in the shadow of the Maruti 800, and slowly and quietly, without much fuss, and it just was a bestseller for many years.
It is quite, interesting to discuss a car which wrote, in a way, a second chapter of India's automotive industry. A first chapter was obviously written by Maruti 800, and the reign that Alto has had is something which I don't think we will ever see it again. What was interesting was that Alto, which was launched in 2000 as a 1.1 liter engine, obviously
You were there.
I was there. I had joined Maruti just about that time, and there were two schools of thoughts in Maruti at that time. What will be the future of Maruti 800? Will it be wound up, or it will be Alto taking over? So as we know now, with the benefit of hindsight, that it took 14 years from that point for Maruti 800 to disappear.
Yeah.
That tells a lot about what was Maruti 800's love in India and the position in India. But Alto took its time to, enter into that territory of India's most loved car.
Right.
I think the first thing clearly was that when it entered in 2000,
It was competing with the 800 itself.
It was competing with the 800. It had a more bigger engine and a more expensive price point.
Right.
And to top of that, just before the IPO, I think it was 2002, when Maruti 800 went through a price cut. So imagine you are already expensive. I'm speaking on behalf of Alto.
Yeah.
You have a bigger engine, and now the car that you are supposed to succeed in a economically conscious market has taken a price cut.
Right. Yeah. And I think also what people don't realize that the Alto was actually a narrower car, because at that time there were certain safety regulations in Japan, and it had a slightly fatter doors, and so the interior space was actually narrower. In fact, even today, one thing about the Alto is it's a very, very narrow car. It's not as spacious as a lot of the other cars, and that's one thing which even happened from the first to second generation. It's just been getting narrower on the inside, which for families isn't a great thing. I mean, the 800, you could really pack families into it. Yeah. And 3 at the back was something very, very common. With all their luggage, if it didn't fit in the boot, have it on a roof carrier.
Yeah. And if you remember, 800 had flatter doors.
Exactly.
Right?
That's right.
Alto initially came with much more bigger door panel, and it reduced the space. Clearly, the challenge for Alto at that time was to really establish itself as a successor. And Maruti management was obviously very nervous about it, because having a market-ruling car and replace it with somebody is always a marketeer's dream and a nightmare both, right? What if it works? What if it doesn't work, right? So one approach which was very clear at that time was that Alto needed an 800 engine.
Yeah.
Right? That was very clear. The second was Alto needed cost cut.
Right.
And I have sat through some very ruthless cost-cutting sessions because we had a challenge to bring it to a price point where it will be a smooth takeover.
Yeah.
And I think both the objectives were accomplished, and we started seeing the rise of this car, as you said, from 16th at the time of the launch to first.
That's right. It's a very interesting statistic. It was number 16 in terms of top-selling cars, and it moved to first. I think it was in 2005, but it needed the Maruti 800 with a 5-speed, the DX version, to be removed, and then that kind of give the window for the Alto, which remained unchallenged actually till 2019. I think it was 2018. It dropped again to second briefly, but then went back again to 2019. And then I think after COVID, there has been a huge shift in what people want to, how they're looking at cars. And of course, the whole SUV phenomenon, which, kind of took over, and hatchbacks were in decline with SUVs going up. And I think that inflection point was around, when the SUVs, I think 22, 23.
More recently, yeah.
That's right. So I think at that point, it was when the kind of, I would say, in a way, the Alto has been, let's say, a barometer of the hatchback segment, because it is the hatchback segment to a large extent.
And I think the lack of competition also helped. There was no credible competitor. While there may have been competitors in terms of product specifications, but there was no credible competitor matching the reach of the Maruti, the distribution of Maruti, because this became the car which India drove as a second successor to Maruti 800.
Correct. Yeah, that's right. And I think also the competition it had, to some extent, it had the Chevy Beat at one point, which it killed off. It had the Hyundai Eon, again, which it sort of killed off. You had the Quid, which gave it a tough fight at that point. But then I think Renault messed it up by just not, kind of investing in the product as they should have in terms of refreshes and life cycle changes. And I think clearly, that's where they lost out. Yeah. But Ravi, very long life cycles for the Alto. I think the first one was 11 years. Second one was 12 years. So, I mean, is this normal? Is it one way, I think, to keep the cost down? Because constant changes also push the cost up. And if it's selling, why change it?
So one is, it is the lack of market maturity which allowed it. If there were enough competitors with same muscle, same distribution reach, this wouldn't have been possible. I think it got a free road or a highway.
Right.
So competitors yielded ground very quickly. Also, I remember one anecdote, right? We were struggling with how to brand it. So there was this campaign which was born called Alto, let's go in an Alto. And that remained as the sign for this car for next decade almost. So people accepted it as a replacement of Maruti 800, while the parallel run happened for about 14 years for this car with 800, but it just kind of overtook the parent or the predecessor.
Yeah, that's right. So I think, a great run for Alto. I think never have we seen a car which has been on top of the sales chart for a good 2005, let's say 14, 15 years. But then what do you think really is the reason for the decline? I mean, we spoke of the inflection point where, the kind of crossover between hatchback sales when SUV sales overtook, I think it was 2021. Clearly, I think after COVID, there's been a rethink of the way people look at cars. I think people have got more aspirational. The SUV body style is something they've been wanting. I think whatever it is, I think income levels then suddenly started going up again. And there was a sort of indulgence in cars, or let's say people were falling in love with cars again. And when that happens, the humble Alto is really not, a car you want to kind of, fall in love with, to put it plainly.
I think the humble Alto was the entry into mobility for many. Okay. And one of the reasons was it offered unprecedented value for money. In 2020, the price of Alto was about 360,000 average weighted price. Now the average weighted price has gone up to 5.5 or something, right? Now, it does two things to you. When you go into that 5.5 bracket, you lose a large population below, and then you enter into competition with the used cars. Right. And used cars are two types, like younger, newer used cars or older used cars. So
what you're saying is after 5 lakhs, it's more you're competing.
It becomes a different market altogether.
Right.
And I don't know why Maruti...
It seems a big jump. I mean, if you look at it, looking at the Gen 3 Alto when it came up, I mean, very expensive.
Yeah.
I mean, almost in certain variants, 2 lakhs more.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether it could be emissions, it could be, the combination of having the additional safety features, packaging it for the 6 airbags, which was supposed to be mandatory, didn't turn out to be mandatory. I don't know whether the material costs had gone up, but clearly it seemed that Maruti were, let's say, wanting to squeeze a little profit out of a very low margin segment.
Yeah. There are two reasonable strategies. One is to cut cost and drive volumes. The other is to maximize your profit when the product is about to exit, right? So Maruti seems to have chosen a route, right? I think it's also high time that the market moves on, because sometimes a good product, a very successful product, can hold the market back also. So now there are newer technologies like electrification coming into it. Also, the CNG did not adopt very well, I must say that. Even today, CNG is a very small share for Alto, right? That tells you that people who are using the car as a tool for trade or as a transportation taxi are not really going in for Alto.
Yeah.
There, a WagonR appears to be a much better.
Correct. I think that's what WagonR in a way has taken
over Alto.
Yeah, it clearly shows a shift in consumers as well, becoming more value conscious, willing to spend that even little bit more to get a car that's bigger, drives better. You've got CNG, let's say, options in it clearly.
Yeah.
So do you think even the customer is becoming, let's say, bypassing the Alto just because he's not seeing enough value in it anymore?
Yeah, it's not enough value. We said that the price went from 3.21 to 5. So obviously you've seen a value erosion. Although I can't blame the company because they had to add for safety, for emissions, and for better interiors and so on and so forth. But a value shift happened there, and now more options became amenable.
Right.
So the moment you have more options, your competition becomes that much tough. And here it is a case of maybe WagonR cannibalizing Alto.
Right. And Ravi, quite a drop actually if you look at it, from after 2018, we've seen a successive drop. Today, Alto is at number 16, rank is 16. So what does it tell you about the hatchback market? I think that's what really this dovetails into, because the Alto is the barometer of the hatchback segment.
Yeah.
It is the king of the budget hatchback segment. Or the entry-level segment. So
many years ago, I read this word called system dynamics in the car. So in a car ecosystem, a new car and a used cars compete. So when the car's price goes too much, the used car will take over.
Right.
Used car becomes short in supply, the new car will take over. So there is this constant system dynamics going on. And I think Alto's price increase has precipitated that system dynamics against it.
Right. And do you also think that people want larger cars now? Families there. I mean, it's a small car at the end of it. People want, larger cars. They want a car that they feel a little safer in. I mean, let's say perception also is that Alto is not a very safe vehicle. It's very, light. It's small. You feel vulnerable in it. So clearly, I think even customers are getting a lot more, let's say, demanding in this regard. It's not just the bottom line.
Yeah. So you are not able to demand when you don't see options around, and now you see lots of options around. So you start demanding more aggressively, and you're getting it either as a new or a 2-year-old car or a 3-year-old car. Both options are available.
Right. And Maruti has been saying, and Mr. Bhargav has been saying, that there's going to be a revival in the bottom end of the market. Do you see that happening? Because clearly it doesn't look like it's happening. And if anything, even at the bottom end, you're going to be having more SUV body styles replacing the hatchback almost completely at some point.
Yeah. A mature market says that entry segment should be addressed by a used car. That's what we have seen worldwide. But here, I think there is still a case, because India is still a very low car penetration country. And there will be people aspiring for buying a brand new car. So I think what could fill in, and really, although we know that the situation with Chinese cars, but Chinese cars are available at $19,000. That's their export average price. So it's possible to build a reasonably good car at that price point. So I think a combination of electric propulsion and some fine features. I'm seeing in metros really clearly a Comet coming in as a additional car or a first car.
Right.
For a lot of people,
Yeah.
it makes sense. It is just fitting in there nicely. Alto's volumes have moved away from metros. Now it's in the middle, which is the urban market.
Right.
And then 28% is rural, 58% is urban. So which means it's going away from the aspirational to functional and then slowly to being replaced over a period of time.
Right. So what you're saying is the Alto really has its the future isn't as, it's not going to be coming back. I mean, let's look at certain numbers. I think at its peak, I think it was 2011, Alto sold on average 26,000 cars per month. I think that's a phenomenal number. In a market which is much smaller than right now. I don't know what it was 2011, but I think maybe half of what it is right now. I mean, today we are 4.3 million, and the best-selling cars is trading between the Punch and the Wagon-R at around 19,000, which still is far away from the peak of the Alto sales. So clearly, I think it's a function of choice, isn't it? Because at that time, there wasn't much choice. So clearly, that number shows that in a market which was much smaller overall, you had one car that kind of had a monthly sale, which is far greater than any monthly sale today as well.
Yeah, I think those numbers will not be easily repeated unless the market becomes really large.
Right. But there'll be so many more players as well.
So many players. So 26,000 is something I think that will be a trophy for it, which will remain for a long time.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say it's going away or something, but it will remain declining.
I think also with the third gen Alto, which came with a big price increase, which you spoke about, they dropped the 800cc engine, clearly because that was one engine which couldn't meet emission norms. And that's amazing. I think that engine had literally a 40-year run. And if you look at the genesis of that engine, it goes back to the late 70s, where it was developed in Japan. So really, that is an amazing engine. The good old 3-cylinder 796cc F8 engine, which we know so well. I've worked on it a lot with my own hands, preparing race and rally cars. So I think that went. So clearly the Alto price jump, only a 1-liter variant and no 800cc, again limited its appeal.
Yeah. Also, I think, one thing we have to see that regulatory burden has been rather intense in the last few years.
Yeah.
Be it safety burden, emissions burden. I think we have gone very aggressive, and obviously there are reasons for doing that. So that has had its impact.
Regulation has killed the small car in effect. That's how it has been the world over. Because, just to make them cost competitively is becoming more and more challenging.
And also, I think one more aspect of this is important, that this was a protected segment. I wouldn't say it was hyper competitive ever. Entry was never hyper competitive. So the reference to the shiny car or nice looking car or appealing car comes because if you have to stand out in competition, you need to be like that. But if you are looking standalone with very little competition, you can sell whatever you have, but that will keep going down.
And Ravi, I'm just trying to figure out who is today's Alto buyer. Because clearly it's an amazing little car, actually, if you think about it. I mean, it can go places where SUVs can go. In fact, we've done stories where we've taken fancy SUVs to Ladakh and this and that, and we get comments from our readers saying that, hey, even an Alto can go here. So clearly the kind of Alto's capability is phenomenal. It punches above its weight. It's absolutely, let's say reliable, low running cost. In the hills, it's fantastic. I mean, we've seen as a car to use in hilly terrain, it's phenomenal because it's got a great power to weight ratio. It's light, and it's got everything going for it. So clearly, it's a very strong product that way, but fundamentally lacking in aspiration.
Yeah. Recently, there was an article about the rise of smaller flats in India.
Right.
So we are beginning to see houses being built for nuclear families. And these are people who are coming from urban towns and rural towns to work in metros and are living in small spaces, right? So imagine a family of two people who are either working in a software industry or a husband, wife starting their career or first 5-7 years of their career. For them, Alto is a perfect car. Yeah, it's a perfect car, right? So if smaller houses are beginning to revive, there is a case for a smaller car to revive.
Right.
But whether smaller car will be able to generate that aspiration or not is a question.
That's the whole thing. I mean, what is your sense? I mean, it looks like the two-wheeler guys who are upgrading are leapfrogging the Alto and going into slightly, bigger cars.
Not easy almost because, finance is expensive in India.
Right.
So leaping is not easy, although the money is available.
Right.
So some people will be weighed down on their ability to pay the EMI.
Right.
And those are the audience for either a used car or an Alto.
Right. And there's still a stigma about used cars, do you feel, or do you think it's being kind of, let's say, people are getting more used to it because you've got a lot of, good online platforms now. It's getting a little bit more structured, a little bit more organized, a little bit more transparent. But is there still the kind of, let's say, the lure of the new car, which people...
The lure of new car is undeniable, right? We have seen it with so many customers in the automotive industry. And also still there is a friction in a used car.
Right.
The friction has not eliminated totally. Being able to get the car I want is even today very difficult.
Right.
If you see the best of the platforms are not selling more than 5,000-6,000 cars a month.
Right. But could it be also that, you want the car in your specific color, trim,
absolutely.
that sort of things. Yeah.
And Alto gives you that flexibility to go and see a shining car in your compound, the smell of a fresh car.
Right. So what you're saying is the threat to the Alto is the used car fundamentally, nothing else. It's got no new car competition.
Yeah.
The threat is the used car.
Yeah, and also I think it lost, if I break the entry level for you, there are three segments. One is a taxi guy. The second is a tool for trade, which means I'm a businessman. During the day, I lug around luggage and do 100 kilometers a day. Or the third is a private buyer. Alto Lure is now really the private buyer. So that's a smaller segment of the total entry segment.
Right. And Ravi, let's talk about the hatchback segment. I mean, do you think we're going to see a revival of it? Do you think, people will lose their love affair of SUVs and want to go back to a hatchback? Because hatchbacks do have their advantages. They're generally lighter, they are more efficient. Sometimes smaller wheels help because you get better interior packaging, the wheels don't take up interior space, you get better turning circle, that sort of thing. But our road conditions are still terrible, which again, favors the SUV again. So it's something that needs to be seen. Or will we see with electrification, people might come back to, again, hatchbacks, which are better for electrified vehicles. Again, for the same reasons. They're lighter.
Yeah.
They can be more aerodynamic, which is important for range, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so being SUV-ish is important, whether you're SUV or not, but being SUV-ish in perception is important. The second thing is people will want a little bit wider car now. And you know that when you go wider, you always add expense. Length is easier, width is more difficult to do.
Right.
And I think there is a case now. I'm really looking at new age manufacturers to do something different. Absolutely. The market deserves something different. And if electrification has to grow, the entry level also has to play its part. So today we do not have very good entry electrification options.
Yeah, they're expensive.
I
mean, you've got the Comet, which is slowly picking up after a lot of push, a lot of, let's say, offers, discounts, that sort of thing, but still very, very tiny numbers compared to what it is. But clearly that's kind of sowing the seed. So, looking at the Comet, that could be a classic small hatch of the future. I mean, obviously not in this form. People want for...
Maybe it's a bit too small.
Yeah, it's a bit too small.
It has to grow up.
It's too small. It's too narrow. It's not a complete car in that sense. You can't take it on the highway. But, you've seen the industry and clearly, we've all seen it. The SUV kind of craze just seems to be getting stronger and stronger. It doesn't seem to have peaked as yet because the next vehicle is an SUV, or some vehicles are, or manufacturers are only SUV manufacturers. They're not manufacturing any.
Yeah, I think we are all guilty of very loosely and broadly defining SUVs.
Yeah.
So anything which looks SUV is categorized
Correct.
as SUV. And if you make the definition broader enough,
Yeah.
you can cover everything in it.
Yeah. Just slap on a skid plate, a little bit of body cladding,
Then everything is an SUV.
then everything is an SUV.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So, but tell me, when you all classify, that's a point I want to make. What in your classification is an SUV and a hatchback?
Yeah. So we have, therefore, to keep the sanity in the car industry, because we are responsible for talking to engineers and talking to sales planning and also talking to dealers. So we have 3 classifications.
Right.
The engineers see a technical classification. Then there is a industry classification, and there is a way consumer is defined, the OEM is defining it.
Right.
So we have place for all the 3 labels.
Right.
Because there is a different audience for it, right? The engineer sees an SUV very differently than a sales planning person does. Then the consumer and dealer see it very differently than the other 2 audience.
Right. Yeah.
So we put all the 3 options.
But, let's say we've seen sales of SUVs overtaking hatchbacks in 2021 and going forward. Were those all SUVs? I mean, how are they classified as SUVs? I mean, what was that classification done? Because I think something like a Fronx could be an SUV where, frankly, just have jacked up a little.
We started ignoring the S, and UV became important.
Right.
Utility, and utility came from space and the higher seating position. But the sports capability, which was go anywhere capability, and all that were given. So these were initially what we used to call soft roader.
Yeah.
Right. So these are soft roaders. Right.
Right.
And then whether you have a CUV or MUV or TUV or
Something UV.
whichever UV you put it,
Makes it like an XUV with anything you want. Mine has an XUV.
yeah. So and then people accept it, right? People say, "Yeah, I have bought an SUV." And those people genuinely believe they bought an SUV.
Right. But again, coming back and, to wrap up on, let's say the Alto, which is really a remarkable story of the Indian auto industry. I mean, we've had the Maruti 800, which really is the hero. That's the car which put the nation on wheels. That's a celebrity car. Alto, a bit of an underdog in that way. It never really got that kind of pedestal or podium it should have got. Though it eclipsed the 800 in many ways, given the run it had and all. I mean, your sense, Alto looks like Maruti will continue making it as long as it possibly can. And I think one feels that Maruti almost has a duty to make it, to give that, let's say, first step of entry-level mobility where other automakers have frankly abandoned it. So I think in that sense, you have to give credit to Maruti Suzuki because, the others don't see any value in it. They can't compete. So they've just abandoned that segment.
Yeah. And
When Maruti still is kind of, let's say, persisting with it.
yeah. And then Maruti is on record to have said that entry level will survive and will continue to play the game.
But sales have dropped dramatically.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and clearly what you're saying is there's no competition for the Alto. Again, sales have dropped dramatically.
Which tells you the customer is not preferring the options. Yeah.
Right. So, but again, what will bring the customer back, or is there a new kind of customer who will start seeing value?
The product has to become appealing.
Right.
Yeah. So if I put today, if I really have to get a customer in the showroom coming for a car which is Alto price band, it has to be much more appealing.
Right.
Somebody will sacrifice the profit to enter a market.
But the thing is, again, I think Maruti Suzuki have always played it with a straight bat with the Alto. They don't want to tamper with a proven formula. So if you look at the styling, it's very conservative, still very robust. Do you think going radical with the design might alienate a big base of buyers, which is also a risk?
Yeah, but I think if you see the world of a youngster, it's filled with many shiny objects. Right. You look at the phone, it's becoming different. You look at the watches, they're becoming different. You look at their shoes, they're becoming different. So why would they continue to buy the same car?
So what you're saying is it's time to do something radical with the Alto? To move away from a proven template of 24 years since it's been around. But really, 24 years, it's had a phenomenal run. Just talking about making the 800 radical. In a way, they tried that with the Espresso. Slightly different car, a micro SUV. I think the design maybe was, just a bit odd. Proportions were completely wrong. I'm wondering whether it was, not getting the design right, or was it just too radical for that segment at the end of it?
Yeah. Okay, I think the expectations have gone higher. It fell short of the expectation.
Right. Because they don't do too bad numbers still, isn't it? But for Maruti, I think what's a bad number can be a phenomenal number for a week.
Dream numbers for some.
Exactly.
To be more, good to Alto, it did what it did, but it had its ground prepared by Maruti 800.
Yeah, absolutely.
You had such a large base of buyers wanting to upgrade that you became a wonderful choice.
Right.
So 800 had a more difficult job convincing people of mobility and all.
Well, I mean, do you think that because at that time there was no competition at all? I mean, look at Maruti at 800, Maruti at its peak at 84% market share, driven a lot by the 800. I mean, the competition was Fiat and Ambassador. So I think Maruti 800 had its moment as well. I mean, obviously it was a wonder car when it came, disc brakes, monocoque, front wheel drive, things which we had never seen before. Already that was, seen that in the Alto. And don't forget, it was 2000 when, you had Santro, you had Deven, you had Tata with the Indica. So there was a fair bit of, competition in the entry segment, because I think everyone wanted to follow Maruti at that time. Which I think now in hindsight is a mistake to have done that.
In Maruti, there was an interesting word which was used called Spincer attack. You might remember it. So Spincer attack was...
Spincer attack,
which means you have a Zen, an Alto and a Wagoner in the showroom. You have to catch the guy with one of these three.
So it's not just a pincer.
You had like three choices for the customer. Right?
Don't let him leave.
Don't let him leave. And Alto, obviously, because of its price position, was the most popular. Wagoner struggled for a long time. If you draw similar volume history for Wagoner, you'll again see a long time to catch up. So if you draw the industry, Maruti 800, then grows by Alto, then grows by Wagoner. That's the three waves of Maruti, I would call it.
But you've had a lot of brands really producing some great products for the hatchback segment. I mean, Fiat, who you were with as well. You had the Palio. A lot of promise. I think they messed it up in many ways. Obviously, fuel consumption was a problem, cost of ownership, and, they priced it very, very well. But, I just wanted your thoughts. Even at the Uno, which, had got a lot of bookings. But is it also that you have to blame the company sometimes? Though they may have had good products, they just messed it up with their strategies.
Yeah, so the marketing mixes clear elements of product, service, distribution, price, everything, right? So any company which doesn't get all of it right. I think the other thing is Santro got it right to some extent, right?
Yeah, I did.
But all the European makes had a problem, right? They came from a legacy of very high level of safety, very high level of build quality, and then you couldn't compete on price.
Because they make the car, and it made the car heavy and
expensive and less fuel efficient.
Right.
And they came from European environments where AC was not important, right? So I have many stories about, how to convince a European about air conditioning is important for India.
I mean, today, even the Skoda cars, the Volkswagen 2.0 cars, still today have bad ACs because they didn't get that
You
right.
need chill machines in 42 degrees, right? You want to get the car cool quickly.
Right. Yeah. So I think, again, it's just coming back to Maruti knowing exactly what the customer wants. I think no company knows that better in that sense. Yeah. So lastly, Ravi, hatchbacks, where do you see it going forward? Let's say we are end of the decade. Now that's everyone's crystal ball by 2030, 6 years down. What's your take on the hatchback?
Okay. Let me call it not just hatchback, but small cars.
So
small entry-level cars.
Sorry, I think that's the right word, because hatchbacks will continue with the Ballinos. And,
so small entry cars. I see them becoming more appealing. The appeal has to be fixed.
But Ravi, there's only one player doing it really, and it's fundamentally Maruti. I mean, I don't see anyone else really. If you look at it, there's Tata with the Tiago. I don't see too much investment there. Yeah, Punch, they are more, let's say, would you call that an entry-level car? I don't know.
It's not priced as an entry-level.
Right.
But
okay. So you think they will have to get more appealing?
Yeah. So weighted price of entry-level will keep going up as the economy improves, right? So inflation will catch up. So you will see entry-level went from 351 to 5 I think it will go to 7. At 7, I think a good, shiny, appealing car may be able to sell, but I don't think the days of Alto can ever be repeated. Those are gone.
So what you're saying is that the cheapest car in India by 2030 would be around 7 lakhs.
7 to 8 lakhs.
The cheapest car. Oh, wow, that's amazing. Shows how the market has evolved, how it's growing. What was a very, very cost-sensitive market, price-sensitive market, isn't necessarily so, because customers are willing to pay a lot of money for buying, let's say, more expensive cars if the value is good. But I think one thing remains, that we are very value conscious. That will always remain.
But anyway, let's toast to half a century of car industry in India.
That's right.
More than half a century now. And I think if we write the history ever, the number one, pedestal will be Maruti 800. Number 2 will be Alto, and then the WagonR, and then it opens up.
So on that note, I think top 3 positions by Maruti, I think locked out for, let's say, most of the history of the industry, at least for the first half century going forward. I think, Maruti in a way is the industry, so we've got another maybe 8-9 years for that. And I think on that note, we'll say goodbye. Thanks very much for joining us. See you again, same time next week on Deep Drive.